So hi y'all, welcome.
You know, we haven't even named this podcast yet, have we?
Nope.
I think it's just the Trans Indie podcast or just the Pride podcast. What do we want to call ourselves?
Let me just do a quick search and see if there's a podcast of a similar name or if there's anything that we
I want you to know I'm keeping most of this in.
Great, so people can see how chaotic we are in real life. It's perfect.
We're a realistic podcast.
I was going to say, I don't know about you two, but I am chaos incarnate.
I believe that's a chaos. That's like a common theme in a lot of queer communities.
I do have to say, my Meta sent me a TikTok the other night that had me in absolute stitches. It was this conservative guy who was going off about people who use they them pronouns, and he inadvertently nailed it perfectly. Basically, he explained that Legion in the Bible, who's a demon, also uses they them pronouns, and so anyone who identifies as non-binary is a chaos demon. And I was like, yes, that's exactly it. I am a chaos demon. Thank you, random conservative dude from the South, for recognizing me.
I feel so seen and validated.
Right.
I actually sent that link. It was pretty funny.
I saw that TikTok and I think I commented on it and I was like, no one gets me like a conservative person trying to insult me.
My favorite is when they get confused on trans terminology and they be like trans men are just men. It's like, yeah, they are.
That's actually the entire point. Good job.
Yeah. And whenever I see people try to correct them, I'm like, don't correct them. Let them continue thinking they're insulting us and actually just validating our identities. We don't need to correct them. They don't have a right to know how to insult us best. Oh my goodness. The other day I was getting another piercing. I got an industrial on last Saturday. What am I saying? So about 5 days ago, I got an industrial, and at the shop, I was with my roommate, and my roommate looks at me and refers to me as with they them pronouns. They're like, they're getting this, and the guy at the counter was like, they? Who's they? And I was like, I use they them pronouns, and he goes, what? Do you have like multiple personality disorder? Like I've never heard that before. And I look at him in my driest sarcastic voice. I go, yeah, I have multiple personality disorder. And he goes, wait, does everyone just talk to you at the same time? Like in your head, do you have like a bunch of voices? And I was like, yeah, yeah, that's why I listen to music. I've got to drown everybody out because that's how that works. And he was like, whoa, that is so cool. I've never met someone. Literally, he starts going on and on about how that's so interesting and what I should do and all of that. And I'm like, and I was sitting there, I was like, how can someone, one, not be able to tell that I'm being sarcastic right now? And two, have such a misunderstanding of how pronouns work and how multiple personality disorder works.
Like, that is definitely a conundrum.
I'm like, you have no idea how DID works, and you have no idea how this. I have no. Yeah, no. It was he also later told me that I didn't look chronically ill. And the way he said it was like he thought it was a compliment.
Why is it that those are always? Sorry, I was going to say, why is it that those things always exist in the same personality? People who discredit gender, people who discredit identity, and you don't look sick. Why is it always the same mentality of people?
Exactly. It's always people who look at just the surface value of things and go, well, this is what I see from the outside. He was also the type of man who made me go stand in front of a mirror with him because he wanted to verify if I was in fact taller than him. Because he was like, you say you're 6'2" and I'm 6'2", but I think you're taller than me. So like I must be shrinking. And I didn't have the heart to tell him that I'm actually 6'1.5".
Oh.
And so he actually just probably was never 6'2".
Thank you for saving his pride.
Yeah,
So
I was
that
like, this
reminds
poor
me of
man.
reminds me of another TikTok video that I saw recently. There is a man who has just dedicated his entire life to being petty to cis hetero men, and it is my favorite thing on the
That's
planet. He
oh, how
legally
to
put
insult Ben.
yes, he
Mhm.
legally put on his ID that he's like 6'3", and he's not. He's like 5'11" or like 6 foot even or something. But it makes me laugh so hard because his name's Kyle, and he's just like, I did this on purpose. And he talks about all of these experiences of just like purposely like doing exactly that. Just like, no, I'm this tall, and I'm
Mhm.
taller than you.
Mhm.
It makes me
Mhm.
laugh so hard.
Mhm. No, every single one of his how to insult men is some of my favorites.
I know this topic has been gone for like 15 minutes now, but I got an idea for a name.
Okay, yes, please.
So I was immediately thinking like we could use like words that start with trans and then put pod, so like trans pod, and then we have to figure out like a word. So the immediate one that popped in my head was like transportation, but that doesn't work. So we need to find a different word.
Let me see. Am I Googling words that start with trans? Yes.
Am I using a name generator for podcasts? Yes, I am.
Okay. 13 words that start with trans. Okay, okay, transfiguration,
What?
morgrifying. I don't know what transmogrifying, transportations, transparentizes, transvalutations, transilluminate, transistorizing. This is really messing with my brain trying to say
Okay.
all of these. Transliteration, transitions, transhistorical, transmigrations, transparentness, transinspirational, transubstantial, transformations, translatability, transcriptional, transcendencies,
Maybe
transmissive,
maybe it's the Harry
transpositional.
Potter nerd in me, but I love transfiguration. It would be fun to come up with a play on that. I don't know
Mhm.
what your thoughts are though.
That would be fun.
Well, I'll have to mull that over, but yeah, I definitely like that idea of transfiguration because it's also a way of changing something, right? If I remember the word correctly.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
because you're like things that are transfigured from one to the thing to the other.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll work with that. We'll workshop it a bit on the back end,
Hmm.
and yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. You know what I just realized? We didn't cover any of the like typical terminology we use, do we? Like AMAB, AFAB, NB, all that kind of stuff, right?
I don't think we did. That's probably important, especially if we're going to
Yeah.
have a broader audience.
I'm trying to think of all of them. Of course, NB, spelled ENBY, is another way of saying non-binary. I don't know where that term comes from. Do either of you?
I don't
NB
actually.
comes from the internet, as most things these days, as most phrases. And it's just the phonetic spelling of what it sounds like to say NB as in the N and the B of non-binary. However, it is not okay to say just NB or spell out just NB, in because NB is used, especially in people of color and BIPOC communities, to mean non-black or non-black people of color. And so it's you just use an N and a B, because that has a completely different meaning. And so you use ENBY to mean NB.
And this is why we ask questions, because I wouldn't have known any of that. See, even one of the three hosts didn't know something about their own designation of gender.
I
Constant
want
learning, constant path
I
of
want
learning.
to add that makes two of us, Ryan. I did not know
Yeah.
the history of that, but it does also bring up another really important topic. As I have mentioned a few times, inclusivity is a huge part of what I want from this podcast and what we're doing. And I am a white person. I don't have experiences from the BIPOC community, and I I hope that we get guests on that can help speak on their experiences and their identity and those other things. But along with what I was saying before, we can only speak from our own experiences, and it's really important that that we keep that in the forefront. At least for me, it's something that I've talked a lot to Ray about, that I have been very nervous about, because I don't want to presume to speak for other people and their experiences. And there is nothing more true than a white person speaking on a BIPOC experience. It is not something that I ever want to pretend to do.
Yep, exactly.
100%.
Okay.
Now, as for AFAB and AMAB, those are pronunciations of the acronyms AMAB for AMAB and AFAB for AFAB, and they just mean assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. It's not an important designation all of the time, but sometimes it informs the way a person was raised or expected. So I was raised and socialized as a woman because I am AFAB or assigned female at birth.
And let me just say, at least from my perspective, man, that makes dating hard. You can't just put like a simple M or F and then they'll know what you're talking about. You have to put in like non-binary, AMAB, and you have to hope they understand what that means. I honestly, it's bad, but I still just default to the M sometimes. It's simple.
I would also like to interject here, as I've heard feedback from other people in the community. If you are talking to someone who is transgendered or non-binary, and yes, those do fall under the same umbrella, it is not appropriate to ask. It is not appropriate to assume, and you are never expected to disclose your gender at birth. That is private information. You are not privy to it, and you do not have to share it. I've had a lot of experiences with that, and I've heard from a number of different people in the community that while those designations exist for a reason and they can be used at your own discretion, it is never appropriate to ask or assume.
You'd never ask or assume someone's assigned sex at birth, or
I mean, you wouldn't ask them for their medical records, right? I mean,
exactly.
Hey, do you have a history of asthma? No. Okay, yeah, that's a great point. And obviously, when I was speaking there, I was speaking from my personal experience as a non-binary person, and that's not going to apply for even assigned male at birth non-binary people. Some will do it completely differently.
I use the AFAB designation in my dating profile because it simplifies conversations, because either people know what it is and they don't ask me, or they have no idea and I take it as a red flag that that person is probably not a safe person to date.
There you go.
Okay. There was one last bit of terminology I just wanted to touch on real quick. This is both a trans and non-binary podcast. And I guess some people might be confused at like why non-binary falls under the category of trans or under the umbrella of trans. And then we just go for a simple definition of trans. It's literally just like a transition from your assigned sex at birth to a different gender identity. I believe that is correct for the most part, right?
Yeah, as long as trans, though some non-binary people do not identify themselves as transgender, that is, it's your own choice on what you identify with or don't, what labels you use, but transgender is seen as an umbrella term for anyone who is a different gender than the one that they were assigned at birth. Whereas, and so therefore non-binary would fall under that umbrella.
Except we just kind of rejected the choice there. We were just like, nah.
So yeah, what would y'all say, how would y'all describe what the podcast is going to be?
I am hoping that this podcast will be an opportunity for everybody to be able to learn a little bit more about the trans community, to be able to connect with other people that may also identify in similar ways. And I would also like this to be a resource for allies that want to understand the experience of trans and non-binary people a little bit better.
I love that. Ryan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I was actually going to say very similar things to what they're saying. So yeah, I want it to be kind of like a window into a world that a lot of people just wouldn't see. They wouldn't understand our experiences because they are somewhat unique. I mean, we all
Mhm.
share in our experiences, but they're still unique,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So giving them that window into it, and then yeah, education's definitely a big one.
I really like that imagery of this being just like this podcast just being a window into a world. And I think the only thing I have to add is I hope this podcast is just a place to have conversations, and whether that be conversations that we have amongst each other or any guests we bring, or if anyone poses us a question after listening to the podcast, I'd love it, just because between education and peeking into our world, I think a lot of it is just about sharing our experiences and having conversations about what they mean to us and what is happening in our community.
Yeah, and that being said, actually, if you have any questions about anything that we talk about, any platform that this is posted on, please send me a message. I'll make sure to monitor all the accounts, and we may
Mhm.
discuss it as a topic, or I may just reply to you. So feel free.
Exactly. And then as for what we're talking about today, today is mostly an introduction, both to the podcast and then to each of us. We want y'all to know who's talking and when and what we're saying and where we're coming from, because sometimes affects like our takes on things. And also it's a way for us to, if we make any references to our identities, you kind of know what those words and descriptions mean to us and for us.
I love that. Would you like to get us started with your introduction?
Okay, I'll get started then. Okay, well, my name is Ray Odom. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as non binary and queer and asexual, or on the asexual spectrum specifically. I'm also chronically ill and neurodivergent, just a couple other intersections to throw out there. And yeah, so for me to break down my identity, my pronouns and gender identity, what those mean to me is I use they, them pronouns because I don't really identify with either side of the, gender. If you view gender as a matrix or a spectrum, fully man or fully woman does not fit with me. So I've identify with non-binary. And when I view pronouns as a way, because personal identifying pronouns are a way to convey who that person is, because that's what all words are. Words are just to convey a meaning, get the proper image into someone else's head. And when the typical person imagines a woman, that does not fit me. And when the typical person imagines a man, that does not fit me. And usually when people use the she, her pronouns, they picture a woman, or they use it for a woman, though not everyone who uses she, her pronouns is a woman. And same thing with he, him pronouns and being a man. So I use they, them pronouns because I just feel that best conveys who I am as a person, or at least doesn't put me in a box that I certainly most definitely don't fit into. And then as for my gender identity, I view myself as non-binary because, like I said, I'm just kind of in the mix. I don't really feel attached to any specific gender. My gender presentation is kind of fluid in between feminine, masculine, androgynous, and like some fantasy creature. So I just kind of play around with it all, and I don't feel really specifically attached or beholden to any certain side. And that's what that means to me. I use the word queer for my romantic orientation because identities are weird, and figuring out romantic attraction versus aesthetic attraction versus platonic attraction versus sexual attraction, it's all can get very confusing. And specifically what I am attracted to, it's hard to figure out what it's beholden to. And I like a lot of feminine traits, but I don't mind, but I like some masculine traits. And I generally just say I like gender non-conforming people. Maybe I'm just T for T. And with that, again, there's no specific identity that kind of captures that whole feeling for me and for what I see in the most popular conversations. And so I just use the word queer because I'm gay, and that's really all that matters. For anyone with more particular interest, they can just have a conversation with me about it. One of my favorite phrases to use is I'm queer, and if you want any more details, take me out to lunch and we'll talk about it. Like, it takes way too long to actually put it into words. And
We
then
don't even, I was going to just say real quick, we don't even have to talk about it. If you just want to buy me lunch.
Exactly. I'll take free food anytime. Or coffee. You can also just
Yes.
take me out to coffee. Um,
Those are my love languages.
Exactly, Shelby. I'm glad that we're on common ground here. I always say that the easiest way to win my heart is just buy me coffee or food. I'm immediately there.
Feed me or caffeinate me. Just feed the serotonin that my brain so desperately needs.
Exactly. My brain is starving for it. Just give it a little bit. So yeah, with that, and then as for my sexual identity, I am asexual or on the A spectrum. Again, it's hard to parse out exactly because people are weird and identities are fluid. You'll hear me say that a lot. Those are some of my favorite phrases. But yeah, what that means for me is that I don't feel sexually attracted to people. I don't get that I am personally sex positive or sex neutral, but which means I'm not, turned away from the idea of sex, but like I do not look at a person and feel sexual attraction. For anyone who's confused by how that works, I know that's for people who are allosexual, it's sometimes a hard thing to wrap your head around. But think of it like a painting or a view of like a beautiful landscape. That's how I view people. People are beautiful and wonderful, and like I have that aesthetic attraction where I find people beautiful, but I don't feel any, like, just like you wouldn't feel sexually attracted to a painting or to a hill. I don't feel sexually attracted to people. So yeah, that's a brief, quick summary, as quick as I possibly can make it, of me and all of my queer identities.
Okay. Well, then I will go next. I am Ryan. I go by he or they pronouns. I am non-binary with very male presentation at the moment, hence the he and the he they. So I am non-binary in a way where I feel like neither gender really can create any sort of like box to fit me in. I am unboxable. So seriously, I'm a world-class boxer. I don't really identify male or female. I'm still male presenting. Looking to go a bit more androgynous, but for instance, I have long hair. I sometimes paint my nails. Sometimes I have my hair up in a bun. It all depends on what I'm feeling, how much my long hair is annoying me this day, and yeah. So yeah, I kind of go back and forth between masculine with some androgynous features, and then looking to kind of get a bit more androgynous as time goes on. I am both bisexual and poly as well. So bisexuality, it's actually more like pansexuality, I guess, is just attraction to all people. Really, I don't really look at gender when considering, romantic or sexual relations. It's just not something that really pops into my head much. Let me see. There's one thing I forgot. Was the other thing? Oh yes, poly. Yeah, so I am poly. Currently have one partner and am open to more. The poly lifestyle is really interesting. A lot of people typically don't understand it, so I'm expecting a lot of questions and talking about that a good bit as well. Lots of intersection with the LGBTQ community, though. I think that's everything, right? Did I miss anything?
Only if there's something else that you wanted to introduce yourself with.
Oh yeah, I'm your editor, so if you hear anything weird, that's my fault. Sorry. And other than that, I just play a lot of video games. So that's probably my main hobby. But yeah, I'm a multifaceted person. I do a whole bunch of stuff from history to politics to you name it.
I love that. Again, unboxable.
Yeah.
Pretty fantastic. Okay, well, I guess that means that it's my turn. My name is Shelby. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as non binary. And this has been a little bit more of a recent discovery for me. I came out in July of 2021, and I have gone through an entire life change since then. It kind of triggered a whole experience in my life. So I identify as non-binary, as I mentioned. I prefer they, them pronouns, but occasionally use she, her. I am mostly feminine presenting, but am definitely a little bit more on the androgynous side of being feminine presenting. I'm also polyamorous, as Ryan is, and that has been a wonderful experience. I'm excited to talk more about that. I also identify as polyromantic, where I have multiple attractions to multiple people that is not specific to gender. Like Ray, I also identify as queer. For a very long time, I identified as bisexual, but for me in my life now, I don't feel like that quite fits because it doesn't. I no longer identify on a binary, and so being attracted to people on a binary no longer makes sense in my life. So I have kind of transitioned to using the term queer, even though bisexual has fit for most of my life up to this point. And I'm also demisexual, which falls under the asexual spectrum. And it has a really big impact on my relationships because it's not quite as clearly defined as some of the other relationship styles that I've seen. And what it really boils down to for me is that whether I am sexually or romantically attracted to somebody, I only have that feeling if I like them as a person. I definitely do not identify with like hookup culture, which is a very large misconception in the polyamorous community. There's a lot of that. There's no judgment, that's fine. But for me, demisexuality is a huge part of my identity because I form bonds and relationships with people before I experience any type of attraction to them. And it's a really big part of the way that I live my life. I currently have 3 partners. I have a spouse who is my nesting partner, and I have 2 additional partners as well. And they have been just a big part of my life over the last year, and I'm very excited to have them and to learn more about everyone else's experience in this as well and talk about kind of where I'm at with that. I'm also neurodivergent, very sex positive. I'm also mental health positive. I hope that that comes across in this podcast. I think that all 3 of us are in a very similar situation with our mental health, but it is at the forefront of the things that I'm working through in my life. And I am trying to be an example to people who don't feel comfortable speaking up and saying that they need help because it is such an important part. And I feel like especially with these intersecting communities that we are all a part of, mental health is a huge piece of that. And it's something that we need to make sure is accessible to people, that we talk about, because unless we do address these things like gender identity and sexual identity and mental health, they're all so intertwined with each other, and it's so important to me to bring that to the forefront. So I will be talking a lot about my journey with that in conjunction with my identities because I cannot separate the two.
Okay. That is the one thing that I forgot. So thank you for reminding. Um, I am also neurodivergent, yes. So ADHD, anxiety, depression is what I adapt to, I guess, is a good way to put it. I adapt to those things. Yeah.
Definitely. I am
I
also ADHD and working on a few other diagnoses as well.
I'm working on all of my diagnoses, trying to find accessible psychiatric services in America where we live is difficult. And personally, I am an adult who most likely has autism, who is on the autism spectrum and possibly also has ADHD. And finding someone who specializes in adult autism so I can take the test, who also, works with my insurance, is very difficult in and of itself. So I currently have no official diagnoses beyond depression and anxiety, but it has been confirmed by everyone in my life and every doctor I've spoken to that I am 100% neurodivergent. It's just figuring out exactly where and what I should be, categorized as.
Yeah, I do not like the like crossroads of mental health and insurance, especially right now. I keep searching for like people who can do like the testing, medication management, and every time I call them, it's just like, oh no, we don't cover your insurance. So I'm like, okay, on to the next one, I guess. And it's just like, ugh, it's a pain.
Exactly. And it's exorbitantly expensive if you do not use insurance. So
Hmm.
It is. And the other thing that I think is important to mention while we're on the topic of mental health and trying to figure out where we stand is that not only is it expensive and difficult to find care, but there are so many roadblocks built into the system that prevent people like myself. I don't assume to speak for anyone else, but I have a lot of executive dysfunction. And even though through my employer, I have a ton of resources and access to ways to make this affordable. I still have to go through the process of filing paperwork and scheduling appointments. And we don't talk about how these things are true barriers for those that struggle with executive dysfunction, because not only do I need help so that my brain will function in the way that a neurotypical person does, but I also have to complete neurotypical steps that are very difficult. I had my psych referral for almost a year before I finally found a good therapist who just said, well, I'm setting a timeline. You have to do it before our next appointment. And then magically, I got my paperwork turned in and I met with my psychiatrist. I sat on that paperwork for a year, dreading filling it out because it is such a barrier. And so it's such a huge problem because it's not just limited to resources, but that is a huge impact. And if you don't have the resources, all of those other barriers are impossible. But even with the resources, it's still barriers that you have to overcome to even start getting the help that you need. It's such a frustrating process, and it's one that we do not talk about enough in this country, in the world. It's such a problem. And I feel like I feel like the more that we talk about it, the more it's going to be apparent that this is a spectrum and everybody lands on it somewhere. No matter how well you're able to function on that spectrum, I fully believe that everyone is somewhere on it.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I have had an email sitting in my inbox for a week to sign up for ADA accommodation days. And I just have not filled it out yet because it's just like, it's paperwork and I'm already here working.
No, it's one of those things that having to they make it so inaccessible to get the diagnoses or to get the help that make things more accessible, which makes it difficult. Also, I want to point this out because I don't want to forget about it. And again, neurodivergent brain, I will forget about it if I don't mention it. I really liked what you mentioned earlier, Shelby, as you were finishing up your introduction, where you said none of your identities can be separated from each other, which I really like, because I feel like that should be talked about more, because I've been faced with confusion before when people ask me why I mention that I'm queer when I'm talking about something else, or I mention that I'm non-binary, or I mention that I'm chronically ill or disabled, or that I'm neurodivergent. Because the thing is every piece of me informs the other pieces of me. And so that's one of the things that make every human experience unique from another human experience. It's because all of my thoughts, experiences, the way I perceive things, and the way I experience things are all informed by every piece of my identity, as well as every experience that I've been through to this point. And that's the same for everyone. And, being neurodivergent the way that I am, I want everyone to have as much information as possible, because when I don't know the reasons for things, I get very frustrated. So I want everyone to know the reasons for the way that I exist in the way that I do, as best I can, if I feel that it's applicable to the situation, of course, which, as previously mentioned, since everything informs each other, it's applicable to most situations.
Well, and I think that this is such an important topic to cover because no one in a neurotypical, traditional, heterosexual experience is expected to separate things like their marriage, their job, who they are as a person, even their religion for some of these people. And I think that is wonderful. But it's really hard to experience life in a different perspective, because when you talk about gender identity or romantic identity or sexual identity, any of these things, if it's outside of what people perceive to be the norm or the expectation of society in general, automatically it becomes this novel idea that, oh, you are only non-binary, or oh, you are only neurodivergent, or you know, you have this one thing that separates you, but everything else is normal and we love everything else about you. But that's not how people work. You can't pick and choose what Legos of the structure that you want to recognize as that person. They all build on each other, and it's really important that we recognize this, because it's rooted down so far to, I mean, this is something I was talking to my therapist about today. The trauma, the happiness, the good experiences that you have as a child, those impact your mental processes for the rest of your life. It impacts everything about you. And all of those things start building from the very beginning. And we would not expect anyone living what we consider a standard, quote unquote, normal life to have to, you know, break apart themselves. We accept those people for who they are. And so it's really interesting to be in the LGBTQ space and living these experiences and feeling like I do have to separate those identities. Like if I talk to some people, I feel comfortable expressing that I'm queer. Other people I don't. And that's normal, but I kind of hate that it is. I should be able to be not neurotypical, queer, and all of these other things all at the same time. And coming out, I think, in this day and age is so vastly different than it used to be because of that, because all of these things are starting to come to the forefront, mental health and identities, and it's not just broken down into who your romantic or sexual partner is. It's just, it's a very interesting thing to see as someone who's known that they've been bisexual for a very long time, and looking back, I've known that gender was not something that fit me as it was supposed to for a really long time. It's interesting to start processing this as an adult who's trying to be functional.
I love that. And that's one of the reasons why I love intersectional spaces and intersectional conversations, because all of our pieces do inform each other. And also there's this whole thing that I think about this a lot, where people who fall into the expected for any certain category, they have a tendency to not have to think about that category very hard, because they're just immediately accepted by society and they see people like them in that aspect all around them. So it's one of those things, like with me, who I'm queer, but I'm also asexual, and I'm also non-binary, and I'm also neurodivergent, and I'm also disabled, chronically ill, which means each and every one of those sections of my life I've had to examine and parse out and think about the way that they affect my life and they affect my experiences. And so there's a lot of introspection that goes through that. And when you spend that much time figuring out who you are as a person and figuring out the way you experience things, simply because everyone around you is doing it differently and you can't for some reason, and you have to figure out why. And getting to put a name to it is such an important thing. But then also there's this blockage of communication where people around you, where the people who have never had to think about that aspect of themselves, you're met with a lot of confusion and a lot of halting and a lot of, why are you making this your whole life sort of thing. Why do you have to put a label on it? Why do you have to put a name on it? So I find it really interesting to think about all of the different intersections, and that's why I think a lot more of the conversations in the queer community are moving into a more intersectional space, and we're trying to become more intersectional, because we've realized that, like, again, every piece of your identity informs another piece of your identity. You can't have one without the other. And so we need to have discussions about everything, and we need to understand and have empathy for those around us.
I think that one of the other things that has stuck out to me in my mental health journey, in my journey with learning my identity in the last year or so, is that every time I discover a new piece of myself, there's always somebody who typically is well-meaning, but they ask the question of, "But do you really think that you're ADHD? Do you really think that you're non-binary?" And it strikes me as so odd because nobody asked me if I thought I was straight when I married my husband. Nobody asked me if I thought that I was making the right choice when I started dating men. Like, it's so interesting to me that anything that's seen outside of that norm, obviously it's wrong. There's a reason for it. You're not thinking correctly. They question it. But if you fall into that standard, stereotypical societal norm, nobody questions it. Even though I spent years of my life miserable because I was trying to fit myself into a box that I was never meant to be in.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting how nobody questions when those choices affect you, but they're what's expected, so it's okay. But now that I'm finding the things that make me happy and I'm learning who I am and I'm expressing that and expecting people to recognize that, that's where people go, but is that really how you feel? It's an interesting thing to see on this side of it.
It is. And then also people, like, everyone seems to think that when you have an identity that is different than the expected, then they seem to think that it affects them so much more than otherwise. Like, even if, like, I'm a very self-contained person. Even if every piece of my identity is as self-contained as one person's can, they seem to when it's out of the expected, out of the perceived norm, suddenly it's like they suddenly have so many opinions about it, and they're like, well, that affects me. And I'm like, well, it wouldn't have affected you if I was what you expected me to be. So why is it affecting you so much now when it still involves you the exact same amount, which is not at all?
I've definitely experienced that. And it's really interesting because I think the most prevalent time that it comes up is when I talk about being polyamorous. I have a lot of wonderful people in my life that are monogamous, and I fully respect their decisions to live the life that makes them happy. That's all I want anyone to do. But I have not had a single situation where I am questioned more than when a monogamous person says, well, poly isn't for me. Well, great. I wasn't asking you out on a date, so it doesn't really matter how you identify romantically. I'm talking to you about my experience, and it always comes back to, well, that's not for me. Well, good. I really wasn't asking you to participate in my romantic life. Thank you.
Right? Like, are you propositioning? Like, thank you for the offer, but no. Like, it's one of those things where it's people, when you share something about yourself, people seem to take it as a reflection on themselves instead, or to think that it's involving them in some way, especially if it's outside of the expected, outside of the norm, or just something they don't understand. They don't know what to, I cannot count the number of ridiculous and hilarious interactions I've had just because someone had no idea what to do with the words that just came out of my mouth. When I was just sharing, a piece of my identity, or sharing something they asked about. Like, in the case of me being disabled, I once was like, I used to work in a grocery store, and I was leaving work, and I had a customer come up to me and be like, oh, where are you headed? And I was like, oh, the neurologist. Very straightforward. And he was like, oh, why are you going to the neurologist? And I was like, oh, because I have epilepsy. And when I say this man's eyes became the size of dinner plates, and he turned and he ran away from me because he had no idea what to say, or because he thought that epilepsy was contagious. To this day, I don't know why he ran away from me, but that is what happened. His eyes got the size of dinner plates. He turned around and he ran. And I just kind of stared after him being like, that was a weird reaction. And it's just sort of things like that. Whenever I think about like times or reactions where people, and I think it mostly comes from confusion or lack of education, where people like for polyamory, people don't understand what it means or the boundaries, or they think it's just because they don't understand the communication and the relationship that goes onto it. And because if they themselves are monogamous, they can't understand the idea of someone being polyamorous. People being able to experience their life that way. And so when faced with that confusion, instead of just being like, I don't understand it, could you please inform me more about it? People tend to just get very defensive or have some very odd reaction like, well, I'm monogamous. Please do not bring that poly to me. Even though, like you said, you weren't asking them out on a date. So yeah, I think most of the confusion and the concern comes from and the reactions comes from confusion and lack of education, but maybe I'm just way too positive. I don't know.
No, I do think it's lack of education. I mean, there's still people that think like the moment I tell them that I'm bi, I'm automatically going to hit on them. And it's like, no. I mean, if you're cute, yeah, but no. But seriously, it's like just because I'm bi doesn't mean that I'm just like automatically gonna start hitting on you. Especially if you're male and you say that you're straight. I mean, we still know how to respect boundaries that didn't go away.
Yeah, it's like just because I'm bi doesn't mean I have no boundaries. Just because. Or when you say, y'all are both on the like non-binary identifying, so y'all may have this too. When you say that you're non-binary and people like, I always say it's like they think I'm going to steal their gender.
All the gender is mine. I'm blocking it away.
Right? And they
I'm
get
a black
so
hole for
defensive.
gender. I'm just going to strip away your binary trait.
Stripping it away because they're like, they get so defensive about their own gender identity. I only experience this with cis people when I say that I'm non-binary, and then they're like, they get so defensive and weird about their gender, and I'm like, I don't know why you think my gender affects your gender, but I'm not the gender goblin. I'm not gonna just sneak around stealing genders.
I do have to say, though, that should be a comic book because I am in stitches about a gender thief. That is the best thing I've ever heard.
I'm
vote for this comic to happen.
I'm gonna make a meme out of that. You know the meme with it's very unfortunate that I have to say this name in the first episode, but you remember the meme with Alex Jones, and he's like, you know, those ducks at the park, they're free. You can just go and take them. I have like 400 ducks now. So it's like, you know, genders are free. You can just steal them from people. I have over 400 genders.
Yes. Yeah, no, and you hear people joke about this, like it's a joke in the non-binary community. I'm sure y'all have heard it where people are like, I'm agender because a gender goblin came and stole my gender. And I love the idea of having some non-binary people who have a million genders because they keep stealing them. And then all of the agender people are there because the other non-binary people stole their genders.
Time for the top 1% of genders to pay their fair share.
A gender tax. Yes. So yeah, no, it's one of those things where people seem to think that your identity is a threat to their identity. And the only time that I've experienced that is that me having explored my identity and come up with words that I feel describe it best, has brought other people to explore their own identities. So I've had people who were like, I was able to come out, or I was able to solidify my thoughts on this or on my own identity because you inspired me to think about my identities. But that's not me. That's not me creating a threat to your identity. That's just you thinking about yourself and your identities. because I definitely think that they're in this world of like heteronormativity and the patriarchy and cis normativity and, you know, able-bodied and disabled disabled. I'm just going to call it ableism. My brain is not working right now. And ableism in the world, people tend to just assume that their experiences are the norm. And I think that's also just a part of the human experience, but people aren't taught from a young age to examine their experiences and examine how they're feeling about things. So like I thought for a long time that I was a cis, straight, allosexual, you know, able-bodied person who was completely neurotypical because I grew up being told that before I could even share what I was experiencing, people would be like, what you're experiencing is normal. And I'd be like, I think what I'm experiencing is not normal. And and no one asked why I thought that, they would just be like, no, you are normal. You are exactly as to be expected. And then when I like reached adulthood and I started sharing what I was thinking and what I was experiencing, people were like, wait, no, that is not normal. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay, never mind. And it still happens to this day where right now I'm still in the process of getting diagnosed, both for like my neurodivergencies and also for my physical disabilities and chronic illnesses, because I've lived my whole life thinking that everything I'm experiencing is normal, is to be expected, is the way everyone else experiences their body. And then I hear things every day like, you're not supposed to feel stabbing pains throughout your entire torso all the time, every day. And I was like, oh, what? That's not how everyone lives. And I think that's one thing that like is a big thing with queer identities. Like you hear a lot of people talking about how they just thought that, you know, no one was, and like it's a conversation in the lesbian community about how they thought nobody enjoyed being with a man. They thought that everyone was miserable with their male partner, and then it turns out they were just lesbian. But because of like jokes about, you know, ball and chain, oh, my husband doesn't do anything. Oh, my husband's so annoying. Because of that, they just assumed that no one actually enjoyed being with their partner, when in fact they were just gay.
I have seen a lot of similar situations in the poly community and the groups that I'm involved with. My favorite like running, I guess it's not really a joke, but it kind of is, like when people talk about their partners like that, like being a ball and chain, like they don't like who they're with. I'm like, do monogamous people realize that you're supposed to enjoy the people that are in your life? Like, is that why people are so accosted by the idea of polyamory, that I can have multiple people in my life that I actually enjoy being around and experiencing life with, and they're mad because they married someone that maybe wasn't the right fit for them? Like, it's really interesting to come from that box of monogamy and a gender binary that I thought that I had to exist in, and then leaving it and going, oh, no, I wasn't happy. I wasn't okay with anything that was going on. And there was a lot to that. It's not just because I was monogamous. It's not just because I was trying to be female when I am so very clearly not. But it's just really interesting how people are so quick to discredit people of all ages of their identity. I remember when I was like 11 years old, I wanted to start going by my middle name. My middle name was given to me from my mom's uncle. My middle name is Lee, the masculine spelling Lee, and I wanted to go by that. And the earth basically broke open in my family, and my mom was so appalled that I wanted to go by a masculine name, and she refused to use it. And I just kind of let it go, because as a kid I was like, okay, my name's Shelby, like obviously that, I can't do that because that's not normal or whatever. And I look back at these experiences and I'm like, how do people discredit identity and gender when even as a young person, you know who you are? It's really interesting how much we have to unlearn about ourselves to fit into society when we don't already fit there. And some people do, and that's great. And I'm so happy that people actually can identify and be happy with the way that society is supposed to have us turn out. But it's really interesting how many people are not, but have to like retrain themselves to think that they are.
Exactly. And that retraining that you do, it's one of those things that I had to have. Like, to this day, I have conversations with my biological family where I started wanting to go by Ray because Ray was my given middle name. And I started wanting to go by Ray at like 5 years old. But my mom was just very against nicknames. It didn't even register in her brain that this was like a gender thing. She was just very, very against nicknames. And so she was like, I named you what I'm going to call you. Like, this is a big thing in our family. Like, my brother Alex is Alex. His full name isn't Alexander. He's Alex because someone asked her if she was going to name him Alexander. She was like, no, I'm going to name him what I'm going to call him. It's just a thing. My mom is weirdly against nicknames. And so I never felt like I could say, like, asked to be called Ray. And it was so funny because if you ever heard me as a child, I would bring it up constantly where I'd be like, if I moved to another city and I had to change my identity for any reason, I would go by Ray. I'd be like, if I moved to another country, my dead name is like, has complicated sounds. And so I was like, it'd be so hard for someone whose first language isn't English to say that name. I should just go by Ray instead. Like, I would find any excuse to be like, what if I just went by Ray? And everyone was like, this is a really weird topic that you're bringing up all the time, but yeah, I guess you could do that. And then when I came out as non-binary, I immediately was like, I've always wanted to be named Ray, and everyone could call me Ray. So I immediately started going by Ray, immediately changed my name everywhere to Ray. And it was the same sort of thing, because like even when I was a kid, again, very neurodivergent child, I really didn't understand or think about the differences between the binary and how everybody was kind of being categorized and boxed in. Like, people would talk about it around me, but I just ignore it. Like, I had that freedom. I was homeschooled growing up, and I had a very and though my parents were very religious, we were a part of a very progressive homeschool group. And so I never felt really boxed in as a child until I went through puberty. So all through before puberty, I was like, I didn't care about gender for anyone. I didn't care about anybody's gender, and I didn't care what people called me because I didn't feel that it affected me, like on a day-to-day life. Like on my day-to-day level, I didn't feel affected by the fact that people seemed to think that I was a girl. I was like, I don't even know what that means, but whatever. And then the second I went through puberty, I was miserable. I hated everything about being feminine presenting, what people expected of me, the way people referred to me, what people like saw when they looked at me, and the words that they used for me. I hated everything about it. And everyone was just like, normal, very cis experience that you're having right now. Which just kind of shut me down and made it to where I wasn't able to talk about it.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I remember, like, as a kid, I didn't really care so much about my gender. I didn't understand why I wasn't able to join the Boy Scouts. I wanted to shoot arrows and do archery. I wanted to build soapbox race cars. I wanted to go hiking. I wanted to go backpacking. I wanted to earn badges for whittling wood. And I was told to sell cookies instead. I wanted to play hockey, and my parents signed me up for softball. I wanted to do all of these things that were outside of what was expected of my gender, but I never saw it as my gender. I just saw it as, why can't I do the things that I want? Why am I stuck with pink things and fluffy things? And why are you giving me porcelain dolls when I want to collect Hot Wheels? Like, it never made sense to me. And now I understand why. But it's really interesting to look back and realize how hard it was just to experience the things that I wanted to without my gender being a barrier. It didn't feel like my gender was really the issue. I never really processed that I had a gender until later, when my friends and my peers started going through puberty. And I've always been I've always been a little bit bigger. I've always had like a shapely figure. So it was really interesting to start then presenting as feminine, but not really feeling like that, seeing my friends have dates and go out and do things with the boys that liked them. And I never really had that experience because I didn't fit the gender stereotype of what I was supposed to for a teenage girl. So I didn't have those kinds of typical experiences for someone growing up female. And it was really interesting to like realize that, oh, it's because I really wasn't. And of course, these people that are attracted to hyperfeminism were not attracted to me because I was always very androgynous. I grew up with a dad who wanted a boy and ended up with 2 girls. And so I got to do all of the masculine things that he wanted to do with a son that he never had. So it's really interesting how stuff like that can impact it. And then I look back and I'm like, why are my parents surprised? Why are they surprised now that I identify more in between the binary than I ever did on either side of it?
Yep. Now that is one thing that's one of the reasons why it took me until puberty to really understand how gendered everything was, because like I said, I grew up homeschooled, so I wasn't like, there wasn't that expectation at school. And then also I grew up with I have 9 siblings in total, and I have 4 AFAB siblings and 5 AMAB siblings. And so there was like an even split. And because there were so many of us, my parents couldn't do a bunch of different things. They couldn't do that many like extracurricular type of projects. So everything we did, every co-op we went to, we were in Campfire, which is like a gender neutral version of Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts. And everything we did was gender neutral because my mom didn't want to have to take different groups of us to different places all around town. And so we instead of doing any sort of sport that would be gendered, we all went to martial arts. So I was in Kung Fu for like 10 years growing up. We were in Campfire, which again, not gendered. We went through, like I said, we did everything. Everything that we did was things that everyone did together. So that's why it didn't become apparent to me until I was, going through puberty. And though at that point, most of my siblings were AFAB, because most of my older siblings are AFAB, most of my younger siblings are AMAB. Most of all of my friends, everyone around me, everyone who was my age, were AMAB. I had a bunch of male friends when all growing up. And that didn't matter until I started going through puberty, and suddenly they started acting weird around me. And I was like, what's in your brain? Why are you acting like this all of a sudden? So yeah.
I had a very similar experience. Almost all of my friends up until junior high school were male. That's who I wanted to run around the neighborhood with and play games. Those are the people that I wanted to play with because I could play rough. I could, wrestle with them. And then all of a sudden, as I started to go through puberty, they started to act weird. And then I realized, oh, I should probably act weird because I am not a male. And then all of my friends became female at that point because that was what I was socially instructed to do at that point. And I had a really hard time connecting with most of my peers. And that was when I started having a hard time in school with bullying and all kinds of things because I never once fit into what was socially expected of me. And it's a really interesting thing to go through because I didn't ever think about it until puberty. It was right about then that I was like, oh, great. Okay, so I'm supposed to wear dresses and look pretty.
I know we've gone on a lot of various tangents. Again, I love this for us. We are all neurodivergent and queer, and I believe that I don't believe in staying on one topic ever. So I love that we've gone on a million different tangents, but because we do only have about 12 minutes left, are there any finishing things that y'all would like to mention, go over, whether it be about your identities, questions that you have for anyone else in the group, something you want to mention on this first episode of the podcast?
Me personally, I'm good. Just wanted to reiterate, if you ever have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact me. And I'll try and respond to everything that I can. And there's tons of great resources out there, tons of great research into it. Get on Google Scholar and look through some stuff sometimes. You'll learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I love that. And I also want to be clear that I am happy to help answer questions. If anyone listening has questions for me about any of the topics that we cover, I am also interested to know what kinds of topics people would like to hear more about. People in the community, people who want to learn more about the community, what kind of information can we provide to help you in understanding a little bit better, whether that's yourself or people in your life that you love. I think that's one of the big focuses that I have, is just making this information accessible to anybody who wants to know more. It's a really important subject for me because I learned about my identity through reading a blog about someone else's experience at my workplace. And representation is so important. And so I want to make sure that not only my voice is heard, but that everyone has that opportunity. So if there's anything that you would like to hear more about, I would love to cover that and see what we can do for you.
100%. I agree with everything both Ryan and Shelby have said. And I also want to put this out there that I also am here if you need anything or have any questions to ask. You can always reach out. And I do want to put this out there. If we've mentioned anything so far, ever in the future, that you don't understand, haven't heard of, don't know much about, or if you have a question that that you feel awkward like asking, you're not sure how to phrase it, I want you to know that you should not feel bad about not knowing something. As long as you are approaching it with an open mind and curiosity, you can't know what you don't know. If you've never been faced with something, if you've never heard something, of course you're not going to know it. You're not going to know every in and out of it. And that's fine. So feel free to ask any questions. I myself am an awkward person, so don't be afraid of, being out of the blue or phrasing it in an awkward way. I won't be able to tell, so it's okay.
Yeah.
The other thing with that I would like to add is that the three of us and our experiences do not represent the entire vastness of the intersectionalities that we identify with. We do not know everything. We do not experience everything that anyone else may. And so if there's ever a sensitive topic that comes up that we talk about in a way that offends you, I would like to know about it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will change my opinion, but I am open to learning, and I want to make sure that this platform is open for that expression. But I also want everyone listening to know that we do not claim to represent or know every single experience from any of the identities that we hold and use. So just keep that in mind as we go forward, that I am going to keep a learning mindset in this, but I understand that I'm a human and I may fall short. So if there's ever anything that I say or represent that is inaccurate or incomplete, I welcome feedback in a respectful way, and I will do my best to follow through with any recommendations and research a little bit more, because as a neurodivergent person, I tend to speak off the cuff, and I know that sometimes I don't always speak from the best place of enlightenment, I guess you could say, and I'm aware of that. So I this is a learning experience for me as well, and I just want to be clear that I don't pretend to know everything, and I welcome any information that may be helpful about any topics.